Imagine you're standing on your own land, the morning breeze off the lake carrying the scent of fresh, cut wood, your hands carefully placing down a piece of rare walnut you spent years searching for. This is your dream, your legacy, your quiet moment. And then you hear it. That's my timber. The scream slices through the peaceful dawn like a blade, echoing across the glassy lake surface. That was the moment everything changed. My name is Mark Thompson, third-generation woodworker, living in the lakeside cabin my grandfather built over 60 years ago on the shores of Minnesota. Every piece of lumber in my collection has a story, carefully sourced across 3 states for a project I've been planning for 7 years. But on that quiet September morning, as I unloaded these precious boards, she appeared, Karen from the HOA, face red, finger pointing, claiming that my timber, the timber I sacrificed for, belonged to her. This wasn't just a neighbor dispute. This was the start of a war. I'm 42 years old, a craftsman who believes in honoring every grain of wood I touch. My grandfather taught me woodworking on these very shores, building pieces that now sit in museums and wealthy estates across the Midwest. He always told me, Mark, wood holds the spirit of its maker. Respect it, and it will respect you. Every piece of timber I had that day was more than material. It was a part of a living legacy. There was a 200-year-old chestnut beam from Oregon, a rare maple burl from Wisconsin, and slabs of rich Kentucky cherry wood, each prepared for a once-in-a-lifetime project, recreating my grandfather's iconic furniture collection to pass on to my family. And then, out of nowhere, Karen walked across her manicured lawn, armed with her entitlement, determined to tear down everything I'd worked for, piece by piece. Karen thought I was just another quiet craftsman she could intimidate with HOA threats and false accusations. But what Karen didn't know was that I've learned something important from a lifetime of woodworking: measure twice. Cut once. Wait for the precise moment before striking the hammer down. If she wanted a war, she was about to get one. And she would learn that in this fight, the timber wasn't the only thing at stake. I thought it would end when I handed Karen every single receipt, photos of me picking lumber across 3 states, even the ink still fresh on the delivery paperwork. But Karen didn't care. The look she gave me wasn't the look of someone seeking the truth. It was the cold, entitled glare of someone who had decided I was a problem that needed to disappear from her perfect lakeside world. The next morning, as I was stacking lumber into my workshop, I heard her voice slice through the crisp air. "I'm calling the police right now." I turned to see Karen, phone in hand, eyes burning with a twisted satisfaction as she barked into the speaker. "I'd like to report a theft. Yes, he's here now. He cut down my tree last night and is hiding the wood on his property." For a moment, I just stood there, the absurdity of her words bouncing around in my head. But the cold chill down my spine reminded me that this was no longer about lumber. It was about control, power, and a woman who couldn't stand seeing a man quietly living a life she couldn't dictate. Within 20 minutes, 2 sheriff cars pulled into my gravel driveway, lights swirling in the morning sun. I could see neighbors peeking from their windows, coffee mugs in hand, as if the neighborhood had suddenly turned into a live episode of some reality drama. One deputy was older, lines on his face like the rings of an oak tree, a man who had seen every neighborhood dispute imaginable. The other was young, eager, the kind who still thought every call was a chance to prove himself. Karen ran up to them, tears streaming down her cheeks as she pointed at my wood pile like it was radioactive waste. "He's a thief! Arrest him now! He's a danger to this community." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply handed the older deputy a folder filled with every purchase receipt, delivery invoice, and photos of me standing at the Wisconsin lumber yard, selecting each piece of wood by hand. The young deputy sifted through the papers, his brow furrowing, while the older deputy glanced over at my carefully stacked lumber, then back at Karen. "Mom," the older deputy finally said, with a tired sigh, "these documents check out. And this wood doesn't match any local species here. It's legal." Karen's face went from red to a bruised shade of purple. "You don't understand! He forged those papers! He's lying!" But her words were falling on deaf ears. The deputies handed me back the folder, gave me a polite nod, and told us to try to resolve things peacefully. They got in their cars and drove away, leaving Karen standing in my driveway, trembling, rage practically radiating from her. I looked at her, and for a moment she looked back at me, her jaw tight, eyes calculating, her mind clearly racing to figure out her next move. That's when I realized this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Karen was the type who didn't back down, not when she was proven wrong, and certainly not when her power was questioned. She wasn't going to stop until she found a way to break me, to push me out of the life I had built with my own 2 hands. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't a man who broke easily. I wasn't just a woodworker stacking timber in his yard. I was a man who had spent a lifetime learning the value of patience, precision, and quiet strength. And while she was plotting her next move, I was already documenting everything. Her words, her accusations, every glance and every false claim. Each one another piece of evidence, waiting for the right moment. This wasn't just a battle over wood. It was becoming a war over dignity, truth, and the quiet right to live in peace. And if Karen wanted a war, she was about to find out exactly who she was dealing with. I thought it would end when the police dismissed Karen's baseless accusations, but I was wrong. People like Karen don't stop when exposed. They take it as a personal insult, something they need to erase. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee on the porch, the sound of chainsaws and trimmers shattered the lake's calm. I looked up and saw 3 men in landscaping uniforms standing next to the granite boundary stone that had marked the property line since 1978. They were getting ready to roll it 6 feet onto my land. My heart pounded as I put down my coffee and walked over, watching them drive bright orange stakes into the ground in a crooked new line that claimed nearly half an acre of my property. "Hold it right there," I said, raising my land survey map. One of the workers looked at me with an uncomfortable shrug. "Mom said to clear everything up to these stakes," he explained, pointing to the markers Karen had apparently planted during the night. I took a slow breath, keeping my voice calm as I pointed out each legal boundary point on the survey, matching them to trees and the iron fence post that had stood there for decades. As I spoke, I glanced up to see Karen standing on her balcony, arms folded, smirking down at us. Her eyes said it all. She wanted me to lose my temper so she could call the police again and twist the narrative in her favor. After nearly 30 minutes of tense discussion, the workers packed up their tools and left, leaving Karen staring down at me with that same cold smile. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a simple neighbor conflict anymore. It was a calculated campaign by someone who knew how to twist rules and pressure people into submission. That evening, I called Tom Rivera, a friend and land surveyor who had helped me during past renovations. Tom understood the legal weight of these boundary disputes, especially when someone was bold enough to move property markers intentionally. He arrived the next morning with his equipment, ready to document everything. Before he could even set up, Karen stormed out of her house yelling, "You're trespassing on my property! I'll sue you!" Tom, calm and experienced, simply smiled and continued his work, explaining he was conducting a legal survey with every right to be there. Karen's response was to threaten him repeatedly while recording us with her phone, her voice rising until it shook with rage. For hours, Tom meticulously confirmed each marker, recording the exact GPS coordinates that proved Karen had moved the granite stone, the iron post, and even a twin-trunk maple tree that had grown on the boundary for over 40 years. This wasn't an accident. It was a calculated theft of land. "Mark," Tom said quietly as he packed up, "this isn't a misunderstanding." She knew exactly what she was doing. I stayed silent, gripping the survey papers, feeling the weight of what was unfolding. That night, I began calling neighbors around the lake. One by one, I gathered stories, complaints Karen had filed, threats she'd made, letters she'd sent to the HOA, lawsuits she'd started to push people away. A couple who had lived nearby told me she had filed noise complaints every weekend, until they finally moved to Florida just to get away. A young family across the Cove shared how Karen's threats of legal action had nearly forced them to take down their dock. Piece by piece, a chilling picture came into focus. Karen was a serial abuser of neighborhood power, using fear and intimidation as tools to get what she wanted. I started collecting evidence. Every photo of her new stakes, every video of her standing outside my property at night, every conversation where she hinted that she could make problems go away if I cooperated. I knew that with someone like Karen, there was no winning through arguments. I had to be patient, precise, and let the truth speak louder than her intimidation. Karen believed she was winning, that she could push me out or break me. But what she didn't know was that every move she made was building the case that would eventually collapse her world, not mine. I knew I couldn't fight someone like Karen alone. So I called Anna Mitchell, a property rights attorney with a reputation for dismantling HOA overreach and neighbor harassment cases across the state. As I laid out every detail, Each moment Karen appeared in front of my window with that cold smirk, each escalation, each violation of my boundaries. Anna listened in silence, then nodded. "Mark, this isn't just a neighbor dispute anymore," she said calmly. "This is systematic harassment and targeted boundary theft. And we're going to stop her." The next morning, Anna sent Karen a cease and desist letter demanding she immediately restore the original property boundaries and cease further harassment, backed with photos, maps, and sworn statements from Tom, the surveyor. We made it clear if Karen pushed further, we would take her to court, demand damages, and secure a permanent restraining order. I thought that would end it. But people like Karen don't let go once they feel they have control. A day after receiving the letter, she launched a new attack, this time online. Karen posted pictures of herself looking teary and distressed on the community Facebook group with captions like, "I'm living in fear of a dangerous neighbor," and "I'm being intimidated for standing up for my rights." A few people, unaware of the truth, jumped in to offer sympathy, fueling Karen's narrative. Then she escalated further, emailing the HOA, claiming I was a land thief, a threat to the community, and demanding they call an emergency meeting to protect the neighborhood. The irony of a trespasser calling herself a victim was surreal, but the worst part was some people actually started to believe her. On Thursday evening, I walked into the community hall. Margaret, the HOA president, was seated with a serious look, surrounded by neighbors, some staring at me with suspicion, others looking down uncomfortably. Karen sat in the corner, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, but behind the act, her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Margaret opened the meeting. "Mark, we need to hear your side. Karen claims you've been threatening her, encroaching on her land, and disrupting the peace here." I took a deep breath, opened my folder, and handed out the survey results, photos of moved boundary markers, and sworn statements from neighbors who had experienced Karen's harassment before. "I won't say much," I told them calmly. "The truth is in these documents." The room fell silent except for the sound of pages turning as neighbors reviewed the evidence. Whispers broke out, eyes darting from me to Karen, confusion replacing suspicion. Margaret frowned deeply, then looked at Karen. "Karen, these documents, they don't match your story." Karen's mask slipped. Her voice lost its soft, trembling quality, replaced by sharp anger. "You're all being fooled. I know where my property lines are. I don't need some fake papers telling me otherwise." But I wasn't done. I turned to the neighbors, holding up photos of my carefully stacked timber, each piece tagged with receipts and sourcing documents. "Karen has been telling people I'm a thief," I said. "Let me show you the truth." I explained that what she called Firewood was in fact a rare wood collection I had spent 7 years building, sourced piece by piece for a furniture restoration project honoring my great-grandfather's craftsmanship, a collection worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Karen's face drained of color as I spoke. The neighbors were stunned, looking at the pictures of the wood, the certificates of authenticity, and the appraisals showing its value. For the first time, Karen looked unsure, shrinking into her chair, unable to maintain the victim narrative. Margaret cleared her throat, visibly shaken. "Karen," she said, "I think we need to have a private discussion after this meeting." She turned to me, her voice softer. "Mark, I'm sorry for the confusion. It seems there's been a misunderstanding." The neighbors began leaving, some stopping to apologize to me, others giving Karen wary glances. Karen remained seated, gripping her tissue, staring at the images of the timber collection as if realizing, for the first time, how badly she had miscalculated. That night, as I sat on my porch, I knew I had reclaimed the truth. But I also knew people like Karen don't back down easily, especially when they realize they've been fighting over something worth far more than they imagined. And I was ready for whatever she would try next. I thought it would end when the truth came out in front of the entire community, when Karen finally realized she wasn't dealing with just a pile of worthless firewood, but with an asset worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I was wrong. People like Karen don't back down when cornered. They become dangerous. It was 20:17 a.m. when my phone buzzed with alerts from the security cameras I'd installed around the cabin. I jolted awake, heart pounding, and moved to the window, gently pulling back the curtain. In the thick fog rolling across the lake, Karen emerged, dressed in black, an axe in her hand, moving toward my timber storage like a ghost with purpose. She wasn't raging or screaming. Every step she took was cold, methodical, like someone who had planned every second of what she was about to do. I stood frozen, Watching each strike of her axe splinter the rare timber, I had spent 7 years carefully collecting from mills across the Midwest. Each blow echoed in the night, shattering the peace by the lakeside and with it the pieces of my grandfather's legacy. Walnut boards split, maple slabs shattered. The echo of wood cracking in the cold air was like a physical pain tearing through my chest. But Karen didn't stop there. When the woodpile was mostly destroyed, she turned toward the cabin, smashing the glass of the front window with the axe handle and kicking in the door. The crash of breaking glass echoed across the lake, a sound so violent that even the night birds took off in fear. I couldn't stay still any longer. I ran outside, standing in the yard barefoot, my breath visible in the cold air, just a few feet from Karen as she stepped out of my cabin with that axe still in her hand, splinters of wood stuck to the blade, her eyes burning with a cruel satisfaction. She had smashed the antique clock my grandmother left me, a family heirloom from 1923, now in pieces on the floor, fragments scattered like the remains of a shattered memory. I took a step forward, fists clenched so hard I could feel my nails digging into my palms, my heartbeat sensing with the cold wind cutting across the yard. Karen looked at me and smirked, that twisted, mocking half-smile on her face. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before stealing what's not yours." She spat, her voice cold, her eyes daring me to react. I don't remember picking up the axe she dropped. I don't remember taking those first steps toward her, closing the distance until I could see the gleam of her eyes in the dim light. All I remember is Anna's voice slicing through my rage, sharp and clear, calling out from the driveway where she had just arrived after my emergency text. "Mark, stop, put the axe down." Her words hit me like cold water. I looked down and saw my hands, shaking around the handle of the axe, the cold metal biting into my palms. I inhaled, the cold air burning my lungs, and let go, dropping the axe to the ground where it clattered against the stones, the sound sharp and final. Karen flinched, the smirk gone from her face, replaced by a flicker of fear before she turned and quickly walked back toward her house, disappearing into the fog. I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of my timber, the scattered fragments of rare wood glinting under the porch light. Anna came up beside me, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Mark," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You won tonight. She wanted you to lose control, but you didn't." I nodded, unable to speak, turning back toward the cabin. I stepped over broken glass and splintered wood, noticing the red recording light on the security camera, capturing every moment of Karen's destruction. At that moment, I knew I had what I needed to take her down, not just for trespassing but for felony destruction of property worth over 300,000. But more than that, I knew I had reclaimed the most important thing she was trying to steal from me, my peace. Karen wasn't done yet, but neither was I, and now I wasn't alone. My neighbors had seen the truth. The community was awake, and the law was on my side. Karen was about to find out just how costly it would be to try to destroy what others had spent a lifetime building. I thought it would all end the night my cameras captured Karen smashing through my carefully stacked timber, splintering rare walnut slabs I'd spent years sourcing, and shattering my grandmother's antique clock with a cruel smile. I thought the evidence would finally be enough, but I was wrong. Karen wasn't done, and I couldn't stand by any longer. The morning after the attack, Anna and I went to the sheriff's office, carrying the hard drive containing crystal, clear footage of every moment Karen, dressed in black, axe in hand, methodically destroying years of my work. Each swing felt like a blade cutting through my chest as rare burls, ancient chestnut beams, and figured maple shattered under her blows. It wasn't just property destruction, it was a calculated strike meant to break me. The deputies watched in silence, their faces shifting as the footage played out. This was no neighborly spat. It was felony-level vandalism worth over 300,000 with clear evidence and intent. Within hours, a warrant was issued for Karen's arrest. I'll never forget the sight of her being led away in handcuffs, neighbors watching from their porches, stunned into silence. Karen didn't scream or fight. She just glanced back at me, that calculating look still in her eyes, as if she believed she still had cards to play. In the courtroom, the tension was heavy. The gallery was packed with neighbors who had once believed Karen's stories, now there to see the truth. Karen entered, still projecting confidence, but her steps were slower, her eyes darting nervously. Judge Harrison reviewed the case file and the video evidence, his expression darkening as he watched Karen methodically destroy what she had claimed was just firewood. When the prosecutor revealed the true appraised value of the timber, over 300,000, the room gasped. Karen's face drained of color, but that was only the beginning. I stepped forward, holding a surviving piece of walnut, turning it so the courtroom lights revealed the fine grain and a small, carved M surrounded by an ornate border. I spoke calmly, but every word was heavy with years of effort and loss. This isn't firewood. This is a legacy. This collection was assembled over 7 years, piece by piece, to recreate the furniture my great-grandfather made a century ago. It is irreplaceable. Silence filled the room as the judge leaned in, the weight of the moment sinking in for everyone present. Karen, who had boldly claimed, "my timber," now sat pale and trembling, realizing her actions had destroyed something priceless. Her lawyer stammered, arguing the valuation was inflated, but Anna was ready. She handed over appraisals, purchase receipts, documentation from the museum interested in displaying the finished project. Judge Harrison's eyebrows rose as he flipped through each document. "Mrs. Hartwell," he finally said, looking directly at Karen, "you are not simply accused of destroying property. You have obliterated a historically significant project valued at over $2.3 million. Karen's mouth opened and closed, no words forming as the reality of her situation crushed the last of her defiance. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice breaking, "but the damage was done." The judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation, and full restitution of $2.3 million, an amount that would strip Karen of everything she owned, including the lakefront mansion she once used as her fortress of intimidation. As she was led from the courtroom, the same neighbors she had manipulated stood quietly, watching the downfall of the woman who had terrorized them. Outside the courthouse, I stood with Anna, the crisp air carrying the weight of what had just happened. Justice wasn't just served for me, it was served for every family Karen had tormented. I looked out across the lake later that evening, the water reflecting the fading light, and felt a quiet strength returning. Karen had tried to destroy my legacy, but in the end, it was her who lost everything. Karen sat there, her head buried in her hands as the final sentencing was read aloud. The judge's voice was steady, declaring over $2.3 million in restitution and an 18-month prison sentence. The woman who once wore arrogance like a crown now looked hollow, lost in a courtroom packed with the very neighbors she once manipulated and terrified. There was no more defiance, no threats, only the heavy silence of a person realizing their life was over in the way they knew it. The lakeside mansion Karen once flaunted was listed for sale at 40% below market value, its reputation forever tied to the most expensive timber destruction case in state history. Realtors whispered that no family wanted to live in a house with such dark associations, no matter how pretty the lake view was. When Karen finally walked out of jail 18 months later, burdened by a debt she could never repay in her lifetime, she left the lake community with nothing but a small suitcase, slipping away in silence as neighbors whispered, "That's the woman who ruined her own life over envy and pride." The lake community, once divided by Karen's lies, found itself more united than ever. Margaret, who had once believed Karen's accusations, stood up at a community meeting with tears in her eyes and her voice shaking. "We were wrong not to listen to you, Mark. We let someone toxic tear apart the peace we all moved here to find." Heads nodded, hands reached out to squeeze Mark's shoulder, and grateful glances met his eyes. No one was afraid anymore. Tom Rivera helped Mark reinstall permanent boundary markers, GPS anchored deep in the ground, so no one could ever move them again. Neighbors came together, offering hands, time, and donations to help Mark rebuild his workshop. The scraps of wood Karen hadn't managed to destroy were cleaned, sanded, and integrated into new designs, becoming part of the furniture Mark crafted to honor the dream he had once shared with his father and grandfather. Every crack in the wood, every careful patch, told a story of resilience and a community that refused to let cruelty win. Mark often sat on his cabin porch in the evenings, watching the lake reflect the golden sunset as the timber dried in neat stacks, waiting to be shaped. The smell of wood in the breeze brought back childhood memories of his grandfather's quiet encouragement, but this time, there was no fear of losing it all. The community had become his shield, protecting not just a man and his craft, but the values that made their home worth defending. The sign in front of the community hall, MYTMBER, MYKB MYRALUS, stood as a promise that what is right will always outlast what is wrong. One evening, Mark's phone rang. It was Anna Mitchell. "Mark, I just got a timber dispute case in Colorado. A family is fighting a neighbor trying to take their antique barnwood. They're asking for your expertise." Mark smiled, looking at the carefully stacked timber waiting in his workshop. "Tell them I'm in." Because he knew that somewhere, There would always be another Karen. But when communities stood together, truth and justice would always win, no matter how long it took. If you've listened this far, remember, never let anyone tell you that what you've protected, the work you've poured your soul into, the legacy you've honored, is just a pile of old wood. Some things cannot be measured in dollars, and when you stand your ground, you're not just protecting your property. You're protecting what is right for your entire community. If you've made it this far, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit like if this story touched you, because it helps more people discover the truth, that some things can never be stolen, never be trampled on, no matter how hard the wrong people try. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more true stories, where justice isn't just a word on paper, but quiet, relentless action by people who dare to stand up for what's right. And if you want me to keep sharing these stories of fighting for justice, of exposing HOA tyrants, and the ownership battles that no one believes until they see them unfold, share this video with someone you think needs the reminder. Never let anyone call what you protect just a pile of worthless wood. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. We'll see each other in the next video, where you won't believe what happens when an HOA president tries to ban a veteran service dog, and the consequences will make you want to stand up and cheer. Hold on to hope. Truth and justice may take time, but they always arrive.